Welcome to Scope. I'm Beheshti, filling in for Waqar Rizvi today. In today's show, we will be discussing the future of the Gulf crisis. Is a resolution on the cards? In its fourth year, the Gulf crisis has persisted. Diplomatic ties remain severed. Earlier last month, the Trump administration, in its last-ditch effort, pushed to resolve the Gulf dispute. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and President Trump's advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner have both rushed to the region in recent weeks to get Gulf nations and Qatar to work towards negotiations. The situation looked hopeful last month with Qatar and the Gulf states back at the table. Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud had stated that significant progress had been made and, quote, a final agreement was within reach. However, the initial talks failed to reach an agreement. This year, Saudi King Salman has invited the Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani to the upcoming Gulf Cooperation Council or GCC summit on the 5th of January. Will talks continue during the GCC summit? Will Gulf states be able to relax imposed sanctions and demands? And is an end to the dispute in sight? To discuss this further, we are being joined by our guest, Ayaz Wazir. He's a political commentator and a former ambassador for the UAE, the Afghan Taliban, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, among many countries. And he is joining us from Islamabad. Thank you so much, Ayaz, for joining us. Ayaz, how do you think tensions have diffused between the Saudi-led quartet of Gulf nations and Qatar since the latest round of talks?
Well, you know the history. I won't go into that, how the relation deteriorated since 2017. And in the last summit of the GCC, the Qatari side was invited, but the Emir didn't go himself. He sent his prime minister. And now this time again, he's invited, but I feel this time he'll go because the blockade will be over because Saudi Arab, UAE, and the others, they have blocked sea, air, and road for Qatar. And the Qatari also wants to have reasonable, if not good, relation with Saudi Arab. But if you go back into a little into the history, Qatar was treated like appendage of the Saudis. The Saudis was almost deciding everything for it. But then later on, when it developed its gas and got a little more money, then it started to play a role in the region and wanted to come out of the shadows of the Saudi Arab. So from there, I think the two started going their ways, and the rest is history. But now I believe the two have realized they want to come closer, and Qatar, I feel, somehow, I'm convinced Qatar this time will go and participate.
Sir, so I also wanted you to mention whether or not you think the tensions have diffused since the latest round of talks. If you could just touch on that briefly.
Well, tension has always been there. If you recall the border touching or the border when you are going from UAE, it used to be when you would cross UAE, then would come Qatar, and then you would enter into Saudi Arab. It was a little strip, but Qatar was coming in. But the relation became so bad that one day Saudis decided to chop it off and make it its part. Now UAE is direct with Saudi. Qatar is gone from within. The relation became so bad. Now in the US, a new administration is coming up, and that would like the two to be on talking terms, because in UAE in Doha, the American have the biggest base in their country. And Saudi Arabia is also very close to America, okay. And the two are dagger drawn, as they say. But now I think they will start moving forward in reducing the tension, moving towards friendship.
That's an interesting point you have made there, Ayaz. Let's also include our next guest into the discussion. We have Mathew Bryza joining us. He is an ambassador and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he is joining us from Istanbul. Thank you, Mathew, for joining us. Mathew, you've just heard what Ayaz said. In your view, was there any significant progress during the talks held last month? And have tensions diffused a bit since?
Well, tensions have diffused clearly between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And yeah, I think, everybody's waiting to see what the ambassador just mentioned. Will the Emir show up at this Gulf Coordination Council meeting coming up? My guess is he probably will. The Trump administration, the outgoing Trump administration, has been trying to mediate this dispute among the whole GCC and Qatar almost since it began in 2017. The Trump administration wants another Gulf diplomatic victory from their perspective, akin to or like UAE and Bahrain agreeing to normalize relations with Israel. Time is running out. So I think there's incentive for both Qatar and Saudi Arabia now to try to deliver such a victory to Trump, because the Biden administration is not going to be nearly as friendly toward Saudi Arabia or its ruling family as has been President Trump. In addition, inside the GCC, there's been some tension lately between UAE and Saudi Arabia. They no longer seem to be united when it comes to the civil war in Yemen. And then finally on oil prices, there's been disputes within OPEC between UAE and Saudi Arabia, with Saudi Arabia not wanting to resume production again as quickly as UAE would like to, because Saudi Arabia is a little bit more conservative about whether or not there's going to be sufficient oil demand, as we wonder if the vaccines against COVID are going to be rolled out quickly enough. So I think now is the most opportune moment at any time since the dispute arose in 2017, and since the U.S. and Kuwait together had been trying to mediate that dispute. One more point is, you'll see that in December, Jared Kushner, President Trump's most important advisor, visited Qatar, and Secretary of State Pompeo visited both Saudi Arabia I guess it was in early November, and then later in November, he went to Qatar as well. So they're trying.
Right. Let's get Ayaz back on this as well. Ayaz, now Mathew say that Gulf nations don't take the same position anymore, which seems to be an indication that perhaps Gulf nations will not also take the same position towards Qatar. Do you see any softening of ties with the other Gulf nations apart from Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think we have to wait for the meeting to take place. First, the participation of the Emir of Qatar, though we would very much like, our assessment is that he'll attend. My assessment is that this is the opportune time if he wants to mend or bridge the gap between them and also the other Gulf countries, because the other Gulf countries also are playing an important role in the regional politics. Qatar, I think, has realized that, and I'm sure behind the curtain, as they say, there must have been some talk that, well, the relation obviously will be there, but not against you, or not so much that it will harm you. So the two have to come closer. Things are changing very fast not only in the region, in the entire world. Things are changing. Nothing is static. Look at recognition of Israel. One couldn't think for, say, about 3-4 years back that it will be done so quickly by the countries in the Muslim world in the Middle East. But now they have done it, and quite possible that others may also consider. So this will be, when they come into the GCC meeting, become a little closer, talk to each other, then many issues that are affecting the region, or that will affect the region in the coming days, they'll have to come closer and mend their differences. I'm afraid if I use the word that they have no choice but to be closer to each other if they want to maintain their sovereignty, maintain their independence, or keep the wealth or the richness that they have safe from outside forces. Because, Qatar is a very, very tiny little country. I remember when I was there, its total population, including everybody, was 300,000 people. The rest are all expatriate. And imagine how rich the country is, oil and gas, everything. So and the same applies to Saudi. They also need stability, particularly from the neighbor. They cannot afford to have anti-Qatar or Iran becoming more stronger with the help of Qatar or with the help of Turkey. So that is to be diffused, and GCC, I think, will grow a little more closer and a bit stronger in their relationship.
Right. Thank you so much, Ayaz Wazir, for joining us. Mathew, you just heard what Ayaz said. Ayaz said that Gulf nations have no choice but to resume closer ties. What are your thoughts on that? And also, the Gulf states impose tough sanctions and strict demands, like shutting down a Turkish base, scaling down ties with Iran. Can we see the Gulf states perhaps ease these demands and the sanctions?
Yeah, I think they will ease those demands and sanctions. And I think, actually, I don't agree that the Gulf states have no alternative but to cooperate. Every state also always has a set of alternatives, and they make their national security decisions based on a number of factors. So I think what's happening now is there's an action-forcing event, which is the departure of Donald Trump and the approach of Joe Biden that's causing all these changes to happen. We may not see the United Arab Emirates decide to warm relations with Qatar. That's not a given because of the differences I mentioned before between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So why this dispute happened was for multiple reasons, but I think one is Saudi Arabia and then Egypt as well as Bahrain were angry with Qatar. They were upset with Qatar for many reasons, but one of the underlying ones, of course, has been the warm relations between Qatar and Iran. And Qatar and Iran, well, they co-own and operate the largest natural gas field in the world. So when Donald Trump came to power, he made his first visit to the Middle East and spoke belligerently about Iran. And so I think that convinced these Gulf states, plus Egypt, to take these tough measures against Qatar. Now with Trump departing and with a President Biden intent on improving relations with Iran, I think, and then after also Donald Trump didn't provide the military support after in September 2019, Saudi oil fields were attacked, or the oil production facility. I think Saudi Arabia has gotten worried that the United States is not going to be there to back it, to support it, if it ends up having a more serious confrontation with Iran. So therefore, Saudi Arabia is ready to warm relations with Qatar. The demands will go away. I think those things are going to fade away, and then we'll see Saudi Arabia and Qatar begin this process of de-isolating Qatar.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Mathew Bryza. Thank you for joining us. Now, moving on to our next guest who is joining us, Hamid Chriet. He is a columnist, political commentator, and a journalist, and he is joining us from Paris. Thank you so much for joining us, Hamid. Hamid, I want to take the discussion over to you. Which of the 13 demands do you think will remain as bottlenecks for the course of the negotiations if they continue?
I think this meeting and this summit is very important for the both parties. Qatar has strengthened his policies and foreign policy strategy with other countries. We've seen that Saudi Arabia is very worried about the post-Trump, which is finished. The new administration of Biden administration will, of course, underline the fact that it's important to have a negotiation directly between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And Biden has said previously when he delivered his speech that he will focus on human rights in this, particularly this region, and making a more better relationship. When Qatar had been isolated 5 years ago in 2007, Qatar and the people of Qatar has been strengthened. And there was a kind of spirit of nationalism in Qatar. I think today the main issue, the main problem is with the Emirati side. We've seen that today that the huge power in the region, which should be Saudi Arabia, we've seen that the Emirate side has addicted the foreign policies to Saudi Arabia, and this is very worry for all parties. and I hope this summit will, of course, open a new negotiation between two parts. Unfortunately, the Kuwaiti mediation was not successful as well. The Pakistani mediation, the Prime Minister Imran Khan wanted to be part of a huge negotiation between two parties, but unfortunately it was unsuccessful. I hope that maybe the Pakistani administration or the Moroccan or the Kuwaiti will engage more negotiation with these two parties.
Right, that's an important point, Hamid. Let's see, and let's hope so. Moving on, how does the U.S. benefit from solving the Gulf crisis? I mean, how do you think they benefit from this? And do you think the U.S. is perhaps pushing for a resolution in order to create a joint Gulf front against Iran, to corner Iran?
Yes, I think the most strategy is to, of course, corner Iran. But don't forget that the pandemic, the COVID-19, has tremendously affected people and this kind of anger in the Gulf region, and not only on the government, but also in the European Union. We've seen that in France with the Yellow Vest and many revolutions in Algeria, in Sudan, and the Gulf countries are not will be affected as well. They are not part of this democratic process. And I believe that today the interest of America is to push more investment, more economic relation ties with this country, and to isolate it, to corner the Iran side. I believe that today we've seen that Saudi Arabia and Emirates will maybe negotiate with the Biden administration, and we will see the result of this summit. Who is going to assist to this summit, if it's the Emir of Qatar or not. And this will give, of course, a huge indication.
Right. Thank you so much, Hamid Chriet, for joining us. Let's see how the GCC summit unfolds, whether or not some developments take place in terms of solving the Gulf crisis. Stay with us. We'll be back after a short break. And when we return, we will be discussing the simmering U.S.-Iran ties and what is going to happen over the next few days, whether there will be some de-escalation of tensions. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's move on to our second topic. U.S. and Iran tensions continue to simmer the night before the anniversary of the assassination of Iran's top military commander, General Qasem Soleimani. It remains to be seen who will make the first move. Will the rise in tensions lead to military action? The U.S. and Iran have both warned each other not to incite escalation. However, we have seen both the U.S. and Israel show off their military might in the Persian Gulf. Soleimani's replacement, Brigadier General Ismail Ghani, said, quote, that Iran was not afraid of confronting powers again. On the other hand, Iran has accused a British security company, G4S, and the U.S. airbase in Germany in the killing of Soleimani. Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement yesterday vowing to prosecute the culprits in this assassination. G4S has denied all of these charges. Yesterday, we saw that Pentagon decided to send back the sole Navy aircraft carrier operating in the Middle East. This has reduced American firepower in the Persian Gulf. Does this move signal that tensions are easing, or is a threat of war still a possibility? Let's discuss this and more with our next group of guests. Joining us first is Seyed Mohammad Marandi. He is a professor at the University of Tehran. He is joining us from Tehran. Thank you so much, Seyed, for joining us. Seyed, tomorrow will mark 1 year since the assassination of General Soleimani. Do you think there is still a possibility of military escalation, or has that subsided a bit since the Pentagon decided to reduce firepower in the Persian Gulf by recalling the Navy aircraft carrier?
It's difficult to say because Trump is unpredictable, and also the U.S. deep state is never going to oppose a sitting president when he carries out aggression. No one opposed the illegal war on Iraq. No one opposed the dirty war in Syria. It's been recently revealed by WikiLeaks that Jake Sullivan, who is the incoming national security advisor for Biden, in an email on the 12th of February 2012, he admitted, or he said openly, that in Syria, Al-Qaeda is on our side. And of course, ISIS came out of Al-Qaeda. So when the United States behaves like that in Syria, when it behaves like that in Libya, in Yemen, there is no real opposition to war in the United States. So it's difficult to say. Of course, Iran is a very powerful country. The armed forces have been prepared for any eventuality over the last few days. And it seems that the Americans, after escalating, they seem to be backing off by withdrawing an aircraft carrier. But again, as I said at the beginning, the US president is not predictable, and there is no real opposition to war in the political establishment in the United States. So we have to wait and see.
Right. Thank you so much, Seyed Mohammad Marandi, for joining. Next up, we have Abolfazl Beheshti, and he is a professor of international relations and advisor of the European People's House in Brussels. He is joining us from Lille. Thank you so much for joining us, Abolfazl. Abolfazl, I want to ask you about the Iranian prosecutor, Ali Al-Qassi-Meher. He has implicated the UK's G4S security company and the US airbase in Germany in the killing of General Soleimani. G4S has denied the allegations of providing information to the US Air Force Base. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you very much for inviting me your TV program. The first time assassination of Qasem Soleimani we will take by Zionist and USA force. I don't know what has happened. I know that this assassination bring against the peace in the international community. It's continued this assassination against the peace of region, Middle East, and around the world. But I don't know what has happened about assassination by Germany, by you in England, and I don't know. I can explain.
Right. And what do you make of the Pentagon's decision to reduce firepower in the Persian Gulf by recalling the Navy aircraft carrier? Does that signal perhaps a de-escalation of tensions? Is the possibility of war or military conflict no more?
I don't know, because the authority Iranian, military Iranian, take in patience about this assassination, because the USA force knows any attack against Iran take in veritable dangerous in the world, in the Middle East, because the Iranian don't decision by not emotional decision. Taking decision, the authority Iranian by passions for against USA, because USA try to provocation Iranian authority and military authority.
Okay. That's an important point you've made. Let's go on over to our next guest, who has also joined us on Tabatabaei. He is an analyst on Iranian affairs and the CEO of the Center for Applied Research and Partnership with the Orient. He is joining us from Düsseldorf. Thank you so much for joining us, Adnan. Adnan, I want to move the conversation over to you. What do you think about this? Do you think the Pentagon's decision to call back the Navy aircraft carrier signals a de-escalation of tensions? And secondly, Iran has notified the IAEA that it plans to enrich uranium to up to 20%. How will this impact the chances of negotiating or perhaps renegotiating the JCPOA?
Thanks for having me. On your first question, I would say that both sides, and in particular the US, have been flexing their muscles, and I think to a large extent for domestic purposes. Both sides have continuously expressed that they are getting ready to react should the other side do something. But we have to take into consideration the US took the provocation of Iran to a maximum level. They assassinated generals, they sent in B-52 bombers and submarines, so almost as if they were inviting the Iranians to do something. But the Iranian side knew about this, and they also just said that should they be attacked, they would react in a certain way. So actually both sides have shown more of a defensive posture rather than seeking escalation. With regards to your second question, I honestly believe that the pressure that is now on particularly the Biden administration might in fact end up helping to restore the nuclear agreement, because it's clear that there is no time left. There is domestic pressure on the Iranian government to pursue the nuclear program, to further their nuclear program, and should they not be able to accomplish something very early into the Biden presidency, they will have to take these steps. So in my view, we are seeing the urgency that is imposed on all sides, and that might end up helping both sides, the US and Iran, to restore what is left of the nuclear agreement. That's at least my relatively positive take.
Right. Abolfazl, going back to you, your thoughts on what Adnan has just highlighted. And also, I do want to ask you about this as well. It seems that based on statements by the Rouhani administration that that Iran is perhaps more hopeful about the incoming Biden administration. Do you think that the Biden administration will be starkly different from the Trump administration in its Iran policy, in its approach towards Iran?
I think Biden he wants to take in contact with Iranian about relationships, about in peace. A relation, a base relation about in Iranian nuclear, about this. I think Biden he won't take in good relation with Iran. I think.
Okay. Going back over to you, Adnan, what do you think about the Biden administration? You did say that perhaps this will go back towards restoring the JCPOA, or the terms that were agreed upon. But do you think that the Biden administration will be starkly different from Donald Trump's administration, or perhaps will they hold on to certain policy elements of the Trump policy towards Iran?
I mean, let's be clear that no U.S. government will ever be friends of Iran. So that's a given. But we should also take into consideration that the team that Joe Biden has around him is a team that already served to a large part under President Obama, when President Biden was vice president. They are very familiar with the Iranian case, and they are, in fact, part of the designers of the nuclear agreement. So they know exactly which steps to take in order to safeguard what the previous U.S. administration had accomplished alongside the European, Chinese, Russians, and the Iranians. So I think it is pretty clear for the Biden administration to restore the accomplishment of the Obama years, but this does not mean that they will turn into a friendly or a Iran-friendly government. They will keep up their grievances about Iran's regional policies and other aspects of Iran's power posturing in the Middle East. So they will have to seek their own strategy into addressing these issues, which I guess they will. But again, I think they will be starkly different in that they will pursue diplomatic approaches and not so much the military posturing, the sanctions campaign. I would assume that they seek a different strategy towards Iran.
Right. So perhaps that would be going back to kind of where Iran and the U.S. stood during the Obama era. Taking the discussion back to you, Abolfazl, Iran's foreign ministry has vowed to prosecute those involved in General Soleimani's assassination, and Iran has repeatedly said that the assassination is a blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter. What do you make of this statement, vowing to prosecute those involved in Soleimani's killing?
Contact with the international community, UN, and etc., taking contact with with assassination of General Soleimani by Community International. I think Iran will be revenge against USA and by assassination of Soleimani. The revenge will be take against the agent of assassination against Soleimani.
Right.
The first time, the Iranian authority will be contact with the community international by law and UN, etc. This better for Iranian ones.
Right. Adnan, Iran is also going to be heading for a presidential election in June. Could that also significantly alter Iranian policy? And do you think Iran will still seek to work with the Biden administration to ease those sanctions and to perhaps renegotiate the terms under the JCPOA?
I mean, it is beyond question that the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and the maximum pressure campaign that the U.S. administration under President Trump had imposed on Iran has had its effect in the overall, let's say, foreign policy vision and strategy that the Islamic Republic has. And this will, to some extent, also have its impact on presidential elections to be held on 18th June 2021. So we can assume that there is some impact on the overall trajectory of Iranian policymaking. Having said that, there are still so many things that can happen until June, depending on how far the Biden administration is willing and able to take things with the incumbent president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, and should they be able to, as I said earlier, restore the JCPOA, should they be able to go back to obliging by the JCPOA, both on the Iranian and the US side, which would mean lifting sanctions, then obviously we would have a scenario in which sanctions lifting could happen before the presidential elections in Iran, and the prospects for some sort of continuation of that path in order to seek this de-escalation with the US. This might then also go far beyond June, far beyond the sitting government in Tehran. And also, let's not forget that the JCPOA and the nuclear agreement as such might have been a policy file under President Rouhani, but the decision to seal this agreement was a decision that was basically a consensus among all power centers in Iran, up to the supreme leader of the country. So it's not just with this government that the nuclear agreement will be an important file, and lifting sanctions will always be something that the Iranians will seek far beyond the sitting government.
Right. Thank you so much to both of you, Abolfazl Beheshti and Adnan Tabatabaei. Thank you for joining us. Next up, we will be discussing President Trump's push for Congress to vote on the Electoral College results. We'll be discussing that after a short break. Stay with us. We're back. On to our final topic. President Trump, in his last 20 days in office, has continued to show an unwillingness to accept defeat in the presidential election. This has been evident these past few weeks in his refusal to accept the results, multiple lawsuits challenging the votes, and erratic decision-making. This week, Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley announced that he will formally object to the Electoral College results when Congress meets on January 6th to declare President-elect Joe Biden as the winner. An objection on the Electoral College results will lead to a vote on House and Senate floors. However, this week we witnessed Congress override a Trump veto for the first time during his term with a vote on the defense bill. Since the election, we have seen a largely divided Republican Party, which seems to be strategically distancing itself from President Trump. Will the Republican Party support President Trump and try to overturn President-elect Biden's victory in Congress? To rally support, President Trump has been meeting with loyal backers to intervene in a final move to hold on to power. Let's discuss this with our next two experts. Joining us first is Briana Mack. She's a political commentator and assistant professor of politics and government at Wesleyan University in Ohio. She is joining us from Ohio. Briana, thank you so much for joining us. Briana, what do you make of President Trump's move to get Congress to vote on the Electoral College results? Do you see this as his last grasp on power, or is he just trying to create more confusion and chaos for the incoming Biden administration?
First, I think it's important to clarify that the joint session that's going to happen next week is ceremonial. So it happens, it's a part of the institution, the electoral institution. And so what happens at this And so what happens at this joint session is that the vice president will read out all of the state's electoral college votes, and the joint session, so both the House and the Senate, just approve it. And so it's just essentially being the end of the 2020 electoral season. And so what President Trump is trying to encourage some Republicans to do is actually object or challenge a couple of states' electoral college votes. And I cannot, for some reason, I can't recall the senator's name right now.
Josh Hawley.
Yes. That senator is thinking about objecting either Pennsylvania's votes, and there has been pressure to try and challenge or object Georgia's votes. However, it's my understanding that Vice President Pence has stated that he does not want to try and interject personal politics or even party politics into a largely ceremonial role. While the conversations and the rhetoric about it's very frightening, and there has been a number of experts, and myself included, that say that if there are congressmen that are actually challenging Trump's loss, why aren't they challenging their own elections? Because of course, if there is fraud, one would argue that there would have been rampant fraud, not just at the top level. So if you can accept your own personal results for your own office, your own congressional office, why can you not accept your president's defeat?
Right. Moving on to our next guest who's joining us, I would also like to add him to the discussion. Dr. Robert E Coolish, he's a political analyst and professor of government and politics and a lecturer at law at the University of Maryland. He is joining us from Maryland. Dr. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Robert, how will Senator Hawley's objection fare in Congress, and why do you think President Trump pushed for a move like this at a time like this, knowing that perhaps it may not even work out?
Well, thank you very much. I think that what Senator Hawley is going to do, and perhaps also incoming Senator Tuberville, that they have said or certainly hinted strongly that they're going to vote for an objection. As your previous guest mentioned, there needs to be an objection from somebody in the House as well as somebody in the Senate. If they do this, There's a procedure that's set forth from the Electoral Act of 1887, and it's a convened joint houses of Congress, and they will separate out, and they will have 2 hours to debate an objection that's put forward, and then they will vote. It's a stunt because everybody knows it's not going to go anywhere because of the House of Representatives in Democratic terms. They are not going to vote in favor of an objection. You need both the House and the Senate to vote in favor of an objection to create any real problems. So what this is meant to do is to create more political theater. It's going to slow down the process, but just during the day. It'll create a few more hours of drama. I think during the same time, President Trump has called for many of his base supporters to rally in Washington, D.C. I think it gives them cover to do whatever it is that they're going to be doing, what they're instructed to be doing. Hopefully there's not too much violence going on. So this is more of a stunt than anything that's real. It's very clear that President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris will be inaugurated come January 20th. But there's a larger problem here, and the larger problem is that in terms of the symbolism of this, it's destroying democratic norms. It's subverting our democratic process. I agree with your last guest that it just makes no sense that individuals that would be suggesting that there's fraud at the top of the ticket at the same time are not acknowledging that their own election, particularly people in the House, would also be suspect. So this doesn't make sense. It's not made to make sense. It's made to undermine, to create confusion. And it's going to have, assuming everything moves forward on January 20th, I think it's inviting violence and disruption over the next 2.5 weeks. And then I think we have more issues moving forward because they're destroying the sanctity of the electoral process. And so moving on 2 years from now, 4 years from now, when a candidate from a local state, a senatorial race or a 2024 election, if somebody loses both the popular vote and the electoral vote, this is creating a bit of a sense that, hey, Democratic votes don't matter, and that a vice president, the sitting vice president, or other individual or state legislatures can overturn the votes of the people. And that's very, very dangerous.
Right. Back over to you, Brianna. We saw Congress override the president's veto for the first time, and that too in his final days in office. And I really want to emphasize on this point. It seems that the Republican Party has become rather divided since the election. How much support does President Trump truly have among the Republicans in Congress? And will they support an objection? Dr. Roberts said that this is more than anything a stunt.
I agree with the assertion that it could be a stunt. I think right now the Republican Party is in the middle of chaos. So, like, we see a active split going on. So, of course, you have your old guard, your long-term GOP members like Mitt Romney. So those who were, the institution before President Trump. And then you have also this newer cohort of individuals, including, Tuberville and others that were just elected, but, have really invested in President Trump's cult of personality. And so what we're seeing right now is, of course, that split. So the 140 congressmen that have pledged or at least had stated their intention to object, I would argue, of course, these are the pro-Trump camp versus individuals like Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney that have said, hey, you shouldn't challenge this process, because if you do so, of course, you are jeopardizing our democracy. But going forward, I think the reason why the GOP, of course, is facing a split right now is like literally every action right now leading up to January 6th. So we still have 4 days, referring to the runoff election, the special election in Georgia for the remaining 2 seats in the Senate. And of course, now that, the Senate is not voting on the $2,000 stimulus bill, like that has been axed. And now there was this veto, and you still have this rhetoric from the president. I think even recently he's tweeted that the Georgia governor should resign. And so now he's trying to rally his supporters to attack longstanding members of the party. I think at this point, I don't want to say like he's throwing a tantrum of sort, but it seems like since the president realizes that the ship is sinking, that he wants to make sure that there aren't any survivors. And that's really problematic. And so the leading forces of the GOP, the chairwoman and others, they really have to figure out a way to survive the end of the Trump presidency, as well as transition into 22 and into 24, because while we still have hints of folks saying that they're wanting to run, so what Senator Foley has hinted that maybe he'll run for president in 2024, that's still 4 years away. And there's no guarantee that the Trump sentiment, the Trump rhetoric would still be as influential at that time.
Right. Thank you so much, Briana Mack and Robert E Coolish, for joining us. We'll see what takes place in Congress on January 6th and what events unfold. For now, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week right here on Scope.